Silence. The kind that presses against your chest, making every breath feel heavier. Rows of soldiers stand at attention, their uniforms crisp, their eyes locked forward. But their faces betray the weight they carry. The soft shuffle of morning footsteps. The distant chime of a church bell. The faint scent of white lilies and cold stone. And, at the front of the chapel, a flag-draped casket. Inside lies Sergeant Daniel Hayes. A soldier. A hero. A man who survived war zones, impossible odds, and nights so dark they felt endless. But now, he rests in a wooden box, motionless, silent, and beside the entrance of the chapel, sitting perfectly still, a German shepherd. His name is Titan, and in his deep brown eyes, there is something more than just grief. There is understanding, but not the kind we have, because Titan doesn't just feel the loss. He knows. Titan has been at Sergeant Hayes' side for years, through battles, through blood, through the chaos of war. Wherever Hayes went, Titan followed. Wherever Titan stood, Hayes stood beside him. That was how it always was. That was how it was supposed to be. But today, Titan is alone. His handler isn't waking up. His ears twitch. His chest rises and falls with shallow, uneven breaths. He has been trained for combat, for obedience, for discipline. But no amount of training could prepare him for this. Titan's leash is held tight by an officer, a firm grip, keeping him in place. But Titan is restless. Something feels wrong. His eyes never leave the casket. The chaplain steps forward. His voice is low, steady, careful. Today, we gather to honor a soldier, a friend, a man who gave his life in service of others. His words echo through the chapel. Titan doesn't move. Not yet. But his breathing quickens. Something is off. The air seems thicker, heavier. The silence isn't just grief. It's something more. Titan's ears flick backward. His tail stiffens. His muscles coil like a spring. He feels it. Something that no one else does. And then, Titan moves. No one is ready for what happens next. With a sudden, desperate pull, Titan rips free from the officer's grip. Gasps ripple through the room. The leash whips through the air as Titan lunges forward, sprinting down the aisle. His nails click against the polished floor, a rapid, frantic rhythm. Soldiers turn their heads, frozen in shock. Mourners whisper. Someone stifles a sob. Titan is not stopping. Straight down the aisle. Straight toward the casket. And then, he leaps. For a split second, time seems to stop. And then, a soft, hollow thud, as Titan lands on the coffin. The flag shifts just slightly. And for that single, impossible moment, it almost looks as if Sergeant Hayes is breathing. Titan doesn't bark. He doesn't whimper. Not yet. Instead, he sniffs frantically, pressing his nose against Hayes' uniform. The same way he did after an explosion, after a firefight, when he needed to check if his handler was still alive. But there's no movement, no breath. Titan nudges the fabric again. Nothing. His ears lower. His body trembles. And then, a low, mournful whimper. A sound so deep, so raw, so broken, that it shatters everyone in the room. Some soldiers turn away. A woman in the front pew covers her mouth, shaking. Even the chaplain pauses, struggling to find his voice again. Titan's body lowers. He curls against the casket, pressing into the only piece of his handler that remains. His breathing slows, his eyes close. And in that moment, it feels like he's trying to follow him, as if he could will himself into that casket too. But then, Titan's ears flick up. His body tenses. His breathing changes. Not frantic, not grieving, focused. His head lifts slightly, and then he stares. Not at the casket, not at the mourners, at something else. Something no one else can see. A cold hush spreads through the chapel. The chaplain notices it too. His fingers tighten around his Bible. One of the soldiers whispers under his breath. What is he looking at? Titan doesn't blink, doesn't move. He just keeps staring. And for the first time since the ceremony began, the air feels different. Not just heavy with grief. Something else is here. And Titan knows it. For a moment, The world stands still. Titan remains frozen, his body curled atop the casket. His chest rises and falls in slow, trembling breaths. But his eyes never leave the air in front of him. The way his head tilts, the way his ears flick forward, the way his breathing steadies. It's as if he's listening, as if he sees something no one else can. The air in the chapel changes. It's subtle, almost imperceptible, but everyone feels it. A strange, creeping chill. A shift in the atmosphere, heavy and unexplainable. A soldier in the front row shivers, rubbing his arms. A woman presses her fingers against the folded flag in her lap, her lips slightly parted, as if sensing something she can't quite explain. Titan's gaze remains locked, focused, still. And then, his tail moves. Not in excitement, not in panic. A slow single wag. A flicker of recognition. Like he's seeing someone familiar. The chapel feels like it's holding its breath. And then, just as suddenly as it came, the chill is gone. Titan blinks. His ears twitch. And then, slowly, he exhales. A moment later, a soldier clears his throat, a sound sharp against the silence. The honor guard steps forward. The first rifle is raised. Titan's ears perk slightly, but he doesn't flinch. Then, bang. The first shot of the 21 gun salute cracks through the chapel, echoing into the stillness. Titan stays completely still, not because he doesn't hear it, but because he knows what it means. Another shot, and another. The sound is sharp, final, echoing like a heartbeat that no longer beats. Mourners wipe their eyes. A soldier clenches his jaw so tightly that the veins in his temple show. And Titan, he lowers his head, not out of fear, but as if he's bowing. Then a single note pierces the air. A lone bugler raises his trumpet and begins to play taps. A melody that shouldn't exist. Because it is a song that only plays when a soldier has gone home. Soft, mournful, final. Titan's body sags. His ears drop. And then, a sound escapes him. Not a bark. Not a growl. Not a whimper. A low, heartbreaking sigh. The kind that comes from the deepest part of the soul. The kind that says everything words never could. And in that moment, no one, not the chaplain, not the soldiers, not the family, is strong enough to hold back the tears. The most disciplined of men, trained to endure pain, loss, and war, turn their heads away, discreetly wiping their eyes. A woman lets out a choked sob, clutching the folded flag, as if it's the last piece of Daniel she has left. Even the chaplain, whose voice had remained steady through the entire service, goes silent for a long, aching pause. Titan does not move. He is still. His paws rest gently against the casket, his breath slow, his body no longer tense. And then, he lifts his paw. The movement is deliberate, not rushed, not confused. Titan raises his paw and places it gently on the casket. A final gesture. A final promise. A final goodbye. A soldier standing nearby sucks in a sharp breath. Another murmurs under his breath, "God, help me." Even those who had never believed in anything beyond this life feel something in this moment. Titan does not cry. He does not whimper. He simply stays, as if holding watch over his fallen partner one last time. A deep, steady breath from Titan. A slow blink. Then, he turns his head and looks toward the empty space near the altar. A flicker of recognition. A pause. And then, just barely, so subtly that it might have been imagined, his tail wags. Once. Then stillness. The chaplain inhales sharply. Someone whispers, "Did you see that?" Titan remains there for another moment. Then, slowly, he lowers his head again. The air in the chapel is thick. Not just with sorrow. Not just with grief. But with something else. Something unspoken. Something felt but unseen. Titan remains frozen, his body curled around the casket, his breath slow and uneven. His fur is motionless, except for the occasional twitch of his ears. He is listening, not to the chaplain's voice, not to the quiet sobs filling the chapel, not even to the silence that stretches longer than it should. Titan is listening to something else. Something no one else can hear. His ears flick back. His body stiffens. His head lifts slightly, just enough to see. Then, a deep, commanding voice cuts through the stillness. Honor guard, present arms. And the rifles rise. The first soldier steps forward. His fingers tighten around the cold steel of his weapon. His arms lock into place. His face is emotionless, but his eyes are not. The chaplain steps back, his lips pressed together in silent reverence. Then, fire. The first shot rings out. Titan's ears flick, but he doesn't move. Not an inch. Not a single twitch of fear. Another shot. Then another. Each one sharper than the last. Each one carrying a finality that weighs heavier than stone. Mourners flinch at the sound. A woman in the front row lets out a quiet gasp, clutching a folded flag to her chest. A soldier standing in the second row clenches his jaw, turning his face away, his hands tightening into fists. But Titan does nothing. He remains still, not because he doesn't hear it, but because he understands what it means. This is farewell. The guns fire again, and then the first note of taps drifts through the air. Soft, mournful, final. A song that should never have to be played. A melody that only means one thing. The soldier is gone. Titan exhales deeply. His ears droop. His chest rises and falls with slow, trembling breaths. And then, a sound escapes him. Not a bark. Not a growl. Not a whimper. A low, heartbreaking sigh. A sound that makes even the toughest men in the room go silent. A sound that shatters something inside of them. Because Titan isn't just crying. Titan is accepting. The handler he spent his entire life protecting isn't coming back. Not this time. Titan stirs. It's a small movement at first. A shift in weight. A slow, deliberate inhale. Then, carefully, Titan lifts his paw. The motion is slow. Painfully slow. Like every ounce of energy in his body is fighting against the reality of what comes next. He hesitates. Just for a second. Then, he places it gently on the casket. A final gesture. A final promise. A final goodbye. The room collapses in silence. A soldier in the second row sucks in a sharp breath, looking away. Another shifts, swallowing hard, his atoms apple-bobbing painfully. The chaplain closes his eyes for a moment, his fingers tightening around the small Bible in his hands. The weight of this moment is unbearable. Titan does not cry. He does not whimper. He simply stays. Because for the first time, there is nothing left to do. No mission. No commands. No reason to fight. Just this. Just a silent farewell to the only man he ever trusted with his life. And then, Titan lifts his head. His gaze moves. Not toward the soldiers. Not toward the chaplain. Not toward the family, mourning in the front row. Titan turns toward the empty space near the casket. A space where no one is standing. His ears twitch. His breathing steadies. And then, his tail moves. Just once. A slow single wag. A flicker of recognition. Like he is seeing someone familiar. Like he knows. The chapel holds its breath. The chaplain sees it. His fingers tremble slightly as he exhales. Then, softly, just loud enough for those closest to hear, he whispers. Love doesn't leave so easily. Titan's gaze remains locked. A moment passes. Then, another. His ears flick just slightly. Like he's listening. Like he hears something only he can hear. And then, the air in the chapel shifts. That feeling, that strange, unseen weight, lifts. Titan exhales. His body softens. His tail goes still. And with one last deep breath, he lays his head back down. At peace. At rest. Because he is not alone. Not really. Not anymore. Titan doesn't move. He stays curled against the casket, his chest rising and falling in slow, uneven breaths. He should leave. He should step away. But he can't. Not yet. His handler, his partner, his everything lies still beneath the flag. Titan nudges the fabric, just like he did in the field, when his handler was injured, just like he did every morning to wake him up. But this time, there's no response. And for the first time, Titan knows there never will be. A hand rests gently on his collar. The officer. A soft pull. Come on, buddy. It's time. But Titan resists. His body locks up. His muscles tremble. He presses his nose against the casket one last time. His breath shudders, then slows. This is it. The final moment. The final goodbye. And then, Titan steps back. Slowly. Reluctantly. And in that moment, it feels like the hardest thing he has ever done. The officer tightens his grip on Titan's leash. He can feel the weight in the dog's body. The hesitation. The longing. But Titan doesn't pull anymore. He just stands there. Ears low. Eyes fixed on the casket. Waiting. For something. For anything. But he doesn't even understand what. And then, the chaplain steps forward. He kneels slightly, just enough to be at Titan's level. His voice is soft, heavy with emotion. And then, at ease, soldier. Titan lets out a deep, shuddering breath. Something inside him shifts. His ears relax. His body softens. And for the first time since the ceremony began, Titan stops waiting. One step, then another. The casket remains behind him. The scent of his handler still lingers in the air. But Titan knows. Daniel is no longer there. Not in the way he used to be. And yet, Titan isn't afraid. Because some part of him still feels it. A warmth. A presence. A promise. He is not alone. Not really. Not anymore. Time passes. The house is quiet now. The uniform is packed away. The medals sit untouched on a shelf. The folded flag rests on the mantel. A shrine to a life taken too soon. And Titan? Titan is still here. Still waiting. Still listening. Daniel's sister, Emma, sits on the floor of a small storage unit. She had put off going through his things. But today, she forces herself to do it. One by one, she sorts through Daniel's life. An old duffel bag. A stack of letters. Photographs of a time before war. Before loss. And then, at the bottom of a box, buried beneath years of dust, she finds it. A small, folded military blanket. Her breath catches. The fabric is old, worn from time, but still intact. And there, stitched into the corner, a name. Titan. Emma's hands tremble as she traces the letters. This wasn't just any blanket. It was meant for him. A gift from Daniel. The one he never got to give. Tears burn in her eyes. Her chest tightens. She exhales sharply, closing her eyes. He never forgot you. She lifts the blanket, cradling it in her hands. Then, standing slowly, she turns toward the doorway. Titan sits in the hallway, watching, waiting. She kneels down, holding the blanket in her hands. Softly, she whispers, "This was yours, buddy." Titan sniffs the fabric. And then, as if he knows exactly what it is, he lays down beside it. A deep sigh leaves his body. And for the first time in weeks, he sleeps. Pause, let the moment breathe. That night, the house is still. The only light comes from a soft lamp in the living room. Emma sits in the chair, staring at Titan, curled up with his blanket, his chest rising and falling in peaceful sleep. Outside, the wind is soft. The world is quiet. And then, Titan stirs. His ears twitch. He lifts his head, eyes fixed on the window. His body is relaxed, but alert, as if he hears something, sees something. His head tilts slightly, listening. And then, his tail wags. Just once. Slow. Certain. Emma watches, her breath catching. She doesn't see anything. She doesn't hear anything. But she feels it. A warmth. A presence. A promise. And somehow, she knows. Daniel never really left. Titan knows it. And now, so does she. Have you ever witnessed a bond like this? A love so strong it never truly fades? Have you ever felt like your pet knew something you didn't? Do you believe they can sense things beyond our understanding? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. And if this story touched your heart, hit that subscribe button. Because this is just the beginning. There are more stories to tell. More bonds that will never break. And you don't want to miss them.